I think so many people, when they sell their business, they sell it and they're kind of like, now what? Planning for that is just as challenging as the financial side, and doing that early and often makes things so much easier.
Welcome to P&L, Priorities and Lifestyle, with your host, Rob Schultz. Rob is the founder and president of Schultz Wealth. All opinions expressed by Rob and his guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Schultz Wealth Limited. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Please refer to our website for more information.
Welcome everybody to P&L, Priorities and Lifestyle. I am your host, Rob Schultz, and we are going to talk about M&A, mergers and acquisitions. This is near and dear to everybody's heart that owns a business, or probably should be, because this is where we get to take all the hard work that we've done within our business and convert it into something that we can use after we have decided that we're not going to be in business anymore. And we've harped on this before, that it's really important to get this right, because a lot of us only get like one chance at this to get it right. And to get it right, you need to work with an expert who knows what they're doing. And most specifically, sometimes it's best to work with somebody who specializes within the certain business that you have. And today we have a specialist in M&A for HVAC, HVAC, heating, air conditioning, that sector, a very hot, really, really cool part of the market. Patrick Lange, welcome.
Thank you so much, Rob. I really appreciate you having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, I'm excited to have you because, man, we're going to talk about this from a very specific standpoint to HVAC, because that's what you do. You do it at a incredibly large volume and all over the country, not just in Florida. We were joking about whether the picture above your head was crooked or not. Being a University of Texas grad, I'd say crooked looks about right to me, but you know.
We had a nice baseball game this past weekend, I believe. A few nice baseball games this past weekend.
Yeah. So Patrick, tell us kind of a little bit about who you work with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you once again letting me come on and kind of share my client story, I guess. So you said something at the introduction that's so key, and a common trait I see for the bulk of my clients is, one, they've never sold a business in their life.
Right.
Two, typically it's the biggest sale of their life. And third thing is they typically have no clue what their business is worth. And so there is a lot of activity in the trades that's become attractive to a lot of financial buyers. And many of these buyers are professional buyers. And so I consistently preach that if you own a company, whether it's heating and air or anything else, you should get a valuation done and know what your business is really worth. So you have a goal to work for. And when somebody makes you an offer, that you know it's a good offer, a bad offer, something you should consider. It's just important to do. And so I appreciate you bringing that point out.
Yeah, of course. And from a valuation standpoint, you know, the best way I like to think of it, because as a financial planner, is, you know, this would be so easy if you didn't own the business, because you would be like a typical person and have like a 401k or something like that. And that valuation is pretty easy. You know, that gets valued every single day in the market, and you can sit there and you can look and go, okay, well, that's what my balance is. You know, and I know it needs to be here later, and I can do this, and this, and get there. With a business, it's so different because, first of all, that valuation changes a lot more, or can. Second of all, it's not nearly as liquid. That's the main issue that we run into with business owners, is they have an illiquid asset that generally is going to be very, very important to their financial future for retirement or their next stage in life. And so that valuation is kind of interesting. Patrick, what do you see as far as what the expectations are of these business owners with regard to the value of their business.
It's really all over the place.
Yeah.
Once again, like you've mentioned, if you own a share of a specific stock, you can look up that stock and see what it's worth today.
Yeah.
But if you own 10 shares of it, you can multiply it by 10 and understand what that is. With a business, it's so different. And people don't know who to ask about valuation oftentimes. They don't want to ask their competitors. They don't want people to know that they're considering selling. So they're trying to gather information any way they can. And it's really, it's crazy the extreme that when I talk to people, one of the first things I say, one of the first phone calls we have, I'll ask them kind of, what does the check need to say for you to walk away? Where do you think the value should be? And I have some who have a business that's worth $1 million, and they say, well, if I can get above 150,000, I take it. I have others, the business is worth $1 million, and they tell me they're not going to leave for less than 10 million. So there's this huge gamut. One, because they don't know where to get the advice from that they can trust. And two, sometimes the advice they're getting is real with a business different than using a stock as an example. A company that does $1 million in sales is not the same as a company that does $10 million in sales. And so that valuation is not just times 10, by the income or by the valuation. There's a lot of different things that go into that. Allocation of the business, where it's located, using heating and air specifically. Is it residential or commercial? Do they have new construction exposure? What does that mean to the business? So there's all these things that weigh in on there. It's not as easy as printing out, here's what it's worth today, multiplying it by the figure that's there.
Yeah, but one of the tools that I know you have that I love, is from this valuation standpoint and, needing to start somewhere, you kind of provide that. You have a questionnaire that they can fill out, on your website. And because this is the only space that you work in, you do so many transactions a year. You could pretty much tell what that range is, based upon just a few questions. Isn't that right?
Absolutely, yeah. So we offer two different forms of valuation. One is the one you're talking about. It's our website. It's going to give him a range, right? We're going to ask him 10 or 12 questions, and based on those answers, and it's something we do in-house. It's not automated. We actually get their answers, look at the market they're in, look at their Google reviews, look at certain things when we're putting the report together. So we're actually looking at it for their specific business. But because we're not seeing the tax returns, we're not seeing actual numbers, we have to use a range inside of there. And we do that just to give somebody a ballpark. Once again, so are they at 1 million or 10 million, right? They don't know, and this can narrow it down and say you're between 1 million and 1.3 million, or you're between 8 million and 8.5 million. So it gives them an idea of where they are. And then for people who say, wow, I may be ready to go, I may be ready to retire, then we'll do a full valuation for those people where we'll get tax returns, get P&Ls, get asset lists, that kind of thing. But yeah, to me, we do it as a service. I may have mentioned on the first call we did, I have a YouTube channel, and one of my most watched videos is a video we created a long time ago called Your Baby's Ugly. And I did it as a joke, but it was also for me to get a message out there. I spend a ridiculous amount of my time sitting at tables with husbands and wives who are 60, 70, potentially 80 years old. And I have to tell them, hey, you built it wrong. Your business doesn't have any value. Nobody's going to want to buy what you have. And it'll rip your heart out. It really will. And you do that over and over and over. So I kind of made it my mission where I do podcasts like this. Any opportunity I'm getting on a stage, I write articles for industry publications. I do it so people can get at least an idea of where it's worth. Because if you're 50 and you've done it wrong, well, you've got some time to fix it. If you're 70 and you've done it wrong, that window is much shorter and the gas in the tank is not there. And so we do that kind of as our way of giving back, because people don't know who to ask. They don't want to call their competitor and say what it's worth. They don't want to ask the person who's trying to buy them what it's worth. They don't want to ask their employees. Oftentimes their accountant doesn't do a lot with M&A. They understand book value of a business, but they don't necessarily understand what market value is. And so we do it just for those people who they don't have to talk to me. They don't ever have to hear from me again. We have a lot of people, though, that do it, and they do it every year. So now we have a running total of, are we heading in the right direction or are we not? Included in the summary that we put out, we also say in the questions we ask, use heating and air once again as the example, about maintenance agreements, about new construction, about how much time you're spending in the van actually doing the work. And so based on those answers, that has an impact on valuation. We're going to say, hey, you should focus on getting more maintenance agreements. You should slow down on the new construction. You should hire more people so you have more of a business and not a high paying job. So we give them those tips of what they should be doing that'll increase valuation. And then when they do it year over year, we're able to say, here's where you were last year, here's where you are now. Here's where the market has potentially shifted, but here's what you've done to fix the business like we've advised you to do, and now here's what the valuation is. So it keeps a running total on that as well.
So you mentioned maintenance agreements, and in my experience with heating and air, that's a big deal, because that's that ongoing revenue stream that can be somewhat predictable, that is like crack cocaine to these wrap-up companies. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. It really makes a buyer feel warm and fuzzy. So the reality is, when you look at the cost of a maintenance agreement versus what it generates in cash flow, the numbers are not that high, right? I mean, the average maintenance agreement is $200, $250 a year. So it's not a lot of money, but it's deepening that relationship with the customer. It's getting in the customer's home a couple times a year. It's learning more about what the customer's needs are and potential upsell opportunities. The customer's paying for their own loyalty, right? If you pay me $200 a year to keep an eye on your heating and air system and it breaks, well, who are you going to call?
Right.
Guy paying $200 a year. So they're paying for their own loyalty. So for a lot of reasons, buyers love maintenance agreements, and high maintenance agreements counts. And so, yeah, it's definitely has a strong impact on value. And when we look at the value of a business, I'm often asked, how many maintenance agreements is the right amount? What does that do to valuation?
Yeah.
Reality is, there's no fine line that says for every 100 you get this. But I can tell you, companies that have high maintenance agreements are more profitable, have better online Google reviews, have better employee retention, because they now have training opportunities for their employees. They get relationships with the customers as well. So all the boxes we're looking to check from a buyer's perspective, maintenance agreements help solve those.
So you're in Florida, we're in Texas. You talk to anybody in heating and air, and new home construction, right, is going to be a big part of it. How does that affect valuation if you're kind of heavy in the new home construction arena?
It crushes it. I mean, it really does. So the reality is, many contractors, specifically if you look at national builders, are not loyal, right? It's all about squeezing out margins. And so they're going to go with the cheapest one who can get the work done oftentimes. As a result, if you're the heating and air owner and you do a less than ideal job, it's still adequate, but not as good work as you would normally do, because you've got these financial restrictions to stay in. You're putting your sticker on the outside of that unit. So when the customer in one room is hotter than the other in the summertime, they're mad at you, the heating and air guy. They're not mad at the builder, right? And you can't go in and say, well, the builder told me to be cheap, and that's why we've done it that way. So it puts you in a bad spot from a customer service. And because of the lack of loyalty, buyers understand that, and buyers understand how cyclical the market is. So I know a lot of companies who do a lot of construction, and they're extremely profitable. They understand how to make money at it, and they've got systems in place where they do it. The downside is, I knew a lot of companies who had 70, 80, 100 employees in 2006. And by 2009, after the housing market did what it did, they had 5 employees. And so they didn't get paid by contractors. They had all sorts of problems, and buyers remember that. And so buyers are scared of that. Buyers would rather have thousands of individual homeowners who call you consistently than one big general contractor. And so if the ultimate goal is to sell the business, not to run it and stay profitable, but if the ultimate goal is to sell the business for the most amount of money, I'd stress staying away from new construction.
Ah, that's good. So a couple of thoughts on that. One is, which comes first, chicken or the egg? I know that when you talk to these guys, a lot of times they say, well, that's where we get a lot of our maintenance contracts, is from these neighborhoods that we were doing new construction in. So I'm sure that's a factor. The other is my guess is, or I think I know this, is that that's relationships with these builders, right? Those are relationships. Usually a lot of times they're personal relationships. The question also is, I would think from a buyer standpoint, is that relationship going to survive a transaction whereby the owner is no longer there?
Yeah, and that's something sellers who focus on new construction often say to me when I say, "Hey, buyers are scared of it for all these reasons." They're like, "Oh, they've been with me for 25 years. They'll stay." Well, yeah, they've been with you for 25 years because of you, right? At the end of the
Right.
day, and if you leave, that relationship is left and potential that loyalty. They could now shop you again, and I could be buying something that does hundreds or 1,000 houses a year, and I could lose that in the drop of a hat. And then what did I buy? Right? I mean, when you buy a business, you're buying it based on the revenue, and if that revenue goes away, so what often we see in those environments to protect themselves, buyers want to get creative with earnouts and with retentions
Okay.
and those kind of things. I'm not a huge fan of that. But in that environment, it may be the only way for you to cash a big check, right? At the end of the day is if you're saying they're going to be loyal and they're going to stay there and everything's going to be good, are you going to put your skin, money on the line? And so that's a buyer's often only recourse to protect themselves in that environment.
I have seen here recently, I don't know if it's a trend or not, I've seen these requirements that the owner stay on for a while kind of get longer and longer here recently. I don't know whether that's just due to the fact that M&A has slowed a little bit in recent years, probably due to interest rates and things like that. And I, as my clients, I sit there, I'm very concerned just because 30 years in the business, right? 2 years, boy, it gets past that. And we're talking about a really miserable former owner in general, because I like to joke that, when you decide to hang your own shingle, you became unemployable for the most part. And going longer than 2 years just gets awful. And I've seen 4 years here recently and things like that. What are you seeing?
Yeah, so I'm not a fan of that at all. I'm biased, so I'll admit to that bias. Most of my clients within 60 days are gone.
Okay.
Say, oh, we structure it that way. So when we go to market, we say they're not going to stay, right? So we eliminate a large part of the buyer pool intentionally. There's so many financial buyers in the marketplace that don't know anything about heating and air or necessarily running a business. They're great at raising capital and acquiring companies. And if that owner doesn't stay, they don't have the ability to run it. So many of them, the private equity playbook oftentimes is a 3 to 5 year window. So they want to buy a bunch of companies, put them together, make it one bigger company, and be able to sell it for a higher multiple. And their plan is to have things continue running the way they have. They keep buying more. In 3 to 5 years, they're gone. So if they can get that previous owner to remain on for that 3 to 5 year window, they don't have to worry about running it.
That's
and
right.
Then they can sell, go on to whatever their next venture is going to be, pest control or roofing or whatever happens to be the hot market at the time. And then they're out, right? They're done. Their liabilities left. I tell my clients when we're talking through are you willing to stick around? I wouldn't make a very good employee at my company. I just knew that. I've done things my way for so long that somebody coming in and telling me, hey, this is what you're going to do, and this is what time you're going to come to work, and this is what you're going to charge people, and this is the advertising you're going to do. Because at the end of the day, that new owner has full control of the P&L, right? It's their baby to rock. And now you as the previous owner whose name's still on the door have to be the cheerleader for everybody. Because oftentimes you've got money tied up in it. When they do that, they typically make them roll equity or finance a portion through some sort of earnout. And so you're not getting your money. My very biased belief, and I've sold 140 heating and air companies, my very biased belief is that you should get paid today for what you've built. What you've built in the past, when you sell, you should get paid for. Future performance, I'm okay with a buyer wanting you to stick around to help with future performance, but that should be a separate part of the transaction, in my opinion. Because they do things differently after you sell and numbers slow down, shouldn't affect your retirement from what you've built the last 30 years. Once again, in my biased opinion. Now, a lot of buyers are going to say I'm an idiot. They shouldn't take that risk, all these other things. But I believe that in my heart, because once they buy it, they're the owner. They're going to tell you what to do, yet your money from the last 30 years is based on how successful they are. And I think that's unfair, specifically when they have no industry experience. They very smart people, great at raising capital, but they can't show you a business that they've run successfully, managed people. And at the end of the day, the hardest part of the trades in almost any business at this point is the people, right? I mean, we call it butts and trucks. You got to have enough people to run the service calls. Making the phone ring, doing all those things is relatively easy. Obviously, I think I watched the weather this morning here in North Florida. It's going to be 92 or 94 degrees on Saturday. There's going to be plenty of heating and air calls, specifically air conditioning calls to run. Right. You need somebody to run them. And that takes people skills, and not raising capital and people skills are not necessarily the same thing.
Yeah. Man, I love it, Patrick. You took a courageous stance there that I don't see a lot of folks in M&A take, and I like it.
Now, they don't agree with me. Now,
I know
I'll make some enemies with that one, but I believe it.
There are definitely two sides to this, and there are others, approach it a little bit from a financial standpoint, less from that, true knowing your client standpoint, I guess you could say, and say, oh, well, I mean, the net present value of this with an earnout, with the second bite, et cetera, and so forth, you've got to take all that into account and do the best deal to get the most money you can. If that includes that, then that's what you do. And I can see that, if you're going to take a pure financial approach to it, there's so much risk there. I've got
a large consolidator, I think 3 weeks ago, and they had bought, I don't remember what the number was, 20-something companies, and they filed bankruptcy. Yeah. And they had a lot of people roll equity in that deal. These rolled equity and earnouts that now just went to zero. And once again, if you're 40 or 50, you don't like it, but you can fix it, right? At the end of the day, you can go do it again. If you're 70 and now 20, 30, 50% of your retirement just went away because of a decision another company made that bought you, I don't think that's fair.
No, I agree with you. I can see the argument very clearly, just because I'm getting texts on my phone like every few days right now from one of my clients who sold, and obviously had a number of advisors when he did it. And some of the advice he was getting was from that financial standpoint. And, I was fine with the transaction. I mean, he came out really, really well. Okay. But needed to stick around for the 2 years. And it wasn't the salary for sticking around was ridiculously low. And I had a huge problem with it. I mean, I was like, no. Don't.
How motivated are you going to work for free?
Don't do it for that. I mean, because there wasn't you to they would have wanted him to step up and take, quite a role that I thought was worth a lot more. And so, I'm getting texts, every few days, 63 days and 12 hours, and I get a text, 48 days and 2 hours, till he's done. He's just sitting there, just going, please let me out of this, because it's turned into a nightmare, and that happens all the time. Listen,
and I tell buyers and sellers the same thing, right? So I tell a seller, don't agree to stick around too long, because what if the guy's a jerk or the girl's a jerk, right? Now you've got to come to work. To me, nothing would be more like purgatory than coming to work in my own company that I hated, and somebody else is telling me what to do on a daily basis, and I couldn't leave. That would be horrible. Awful. But then same thing, I tell a buyer the same thing. Don't make that seller commit to this extremely long period of time, because the seller could be a jerk, right? And now you've promising this guy employment or girl employment, and now if you fire them, now you fired the founder of the business. Everybody there is going to hate you. So it sets up for a recipe for disaster, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. Patrick, let's take a break real quick, and we'll be right back. Whether it was one generation ago or 7, more than likely as an American, an ancestor of yours took an extreme level of risk in order to create a better way of life for themselves, their family, and eventually you. Most families have a story to tell, at least one story. My family ended up here in Texas when their wagon broke down in Del Rio. The wagon train they were a part of continued westward only to be completely massacred. I'm Rob Schultz, founder of Schultz Wealth. Our clients are entrepreneurs and business owners, the beneficiaries and true torchbearers of our American pioneer legacy. Our clients are not afraid of change. They are hopeful about the future, and they create wealth for themselves, their people, in this country through innovation, creativity, and hard work. Our job at Schultz Wealth is to help make sure it counts for something. If you're a successful business owner, let Schultz Wealth help you to the next level and beyond. All right, we're back. We're going to talk a little bit about some things, a little bit more of my bailiwick, having to do with, I guess, putting together this financial valuation that Patrick can do for you, as well as, get you the price that your company's worth. And what does that really mean, from a financial standpoint, for you, the business owner? Man, the rubber meets the road right here, don't you think, Patrick?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a big disconnect I see a lot is people, once again, not getting valuations done early. They wait until they're 65 and ready to walk out the door, and they come to see me and they say, "What's it worth?" And I tell them, and they're like, "Is that enough? Is it not enough?" They hadn't been working through that process. I preach to my sellers, talk to your professionals, talk to your financial advisor, talk to your accountant, talk to your attorney. Make sure you understand what you need. Because to me, once you understand what that number is, then the sale process becomes a lot easier, right? Now once you hit that figure, if it's $1 million, $2 million, $5 million, 500,000, whatever that figure needs to be, and you're getting that valuation done to go with your financial plan, to go with your taxes, to go with all those things, then it's easy, right? Either the check makes sense or it doesn't. They either offer you what it needs to be or you don't. You keep working and you're okay with it. So I think the disconnect, though, is they don't plan it enough ahead of time. They don't understand. They come to me and I say, we'll sell it for $1 million. But then we've got to take out potentially 30% for taxes, and you've got a commission for me, and you've got attorney's fees, and you may have some debt in the business that needs to be paid off. And so this big $1 million figure sounds like an incredible amount of money, and it absolutely is. But then, you lose 30%, you lose 10%, you lose $50,000, you pay off $150,000 in vehicles, and now you spent 30 years building this business, and then now you're going to walk away with $300,000. And that probably isn't enough to achieve all the goals that your financial advisor thinks you're going to achieve because you told them you had $1 million business. So I think getting everybody on the same page so that when you get the check, it's going to be enough. You know what your taxes are going to be, kind of checking those boxes. Does that make sense, Rob?
Yeah. I have a lot to say about this. So first thing is Patrick, you've alluded to it a number of times in our conversation, starting in your 50s, starting in your 70s, and we just can't gloss over that. You start late on this and it's just pure luck, if everything aligns and you're good. Okay. I mean, it's just pure luck because you weren't doing any planning, and either the valuation is enough or it's not, and there's not a darn thing you can do about it. And the best way I can illustrate that is, back forever ago, I cut my teeth on 401k plans. I was in the business market, but just a little bit different than I am today. And so I would go in to, one of my clients, had a bunch of welders, let's say, that, make pretty good money, but they don't really necessarily plan very well. My job was to sit down with them one-on-one and say, all right, how much money you got? How much money are you contributing towards your 401k plan? How old are you? And taking all that, and it's just a basic financial planning equation. It's math. That's all it is. It's math. And I would plug that in, and we were either going to go one way or the other with this individual. It was going to be pure full-on damage control, okay, because they're too old to really save from that point forward. What they got is what they got, and that's all there is. And we have a completely different conversation. It's like, well, Social Security is all you're going to have, pretty much. The little amount that you have, you're going to have to preserve as best you can, because you're going to need it for health reasons, emergencies, etc. Good luck. Okay, not a fun conversation. The other conversation, if they have time, okay, which you still have time in your 50s if you're a business owner, not much, but you got some. Okay, if you have time, if you've actually started maybe putting some money aside outside of your business, imagine that, right? That provides you with some grease, some options. And then we get a valuation on the business, and we can plug that in. It's still just a pretty simple financial planning equation. It's all math, okay? And we sit there and we look, we're like, well, may not work out like right now, but if we take into account, these assumptions based upon the growth of your business, what you can do there, growth on assets, being able to accumulate some more assets, which becomes very important. See you being able to exit very successfully at this time. So it's the same thing. It's just generally a business owner, we're talking to somebody who has probably already started late on accumulating assets outside of their business for obvious reasons. You're a business owner. You had to put everything, all your effort, all your money, et cetera, and so forth, probably into it for a certain period of time to be able to succeed. Totally get that. And my side doesn't come easily to business owners. It's not really their world generally. They get so focused within their business and kind of how that operates, and the equity and bond markets don't operate the same way. And it's just different. So yeah, that's kind of what I have to say about that. I think that it's so important to be able to marry the two. It's just as important to get an M&A expert in there to help you find your valuation and market your business. Obviously, you need to know what those numbers do for you. And in my opinion, the only person that can do that for you is a financial planner.
Great point. I agree 100%. And I think something you said that often gets overlooked. I sold my own business, and I can tell you financially it was a big deal, but emotionally it was an even bigger deal,
Sure.
right? Now you're walking away from everything that you've ever known, what you've been identified as, your life. Most small business owners, their kids were raised in the office kind of thing. And the business has often paid their car payments, their insurance payments, their cell phone bills. And so when they sell their business, they have to figure out how to pay for things again out on their own. And so all of those things combined, and you said it, it's a mathematical equation, right? So you can take the emotion out of it and say, mathematically, here's where it needs to be. Here's where you need to be okay moving forward. And my preference when I go to heating and air events and I speak, they'll always say, when should I get an evaluation done? My answer is always the same: yesterday. I don't care if you're 30, if you're 60, if you're where you are, get them done early so you know where you are and you know where you're going. If you have no clue where you're starting, you're never going to get to where you need to be. And so if you get a valuation done at 35 or 40, then when you meet with your financial advisor, you can say, hey, we just had a valuation done. My business is worth X amount. That would help you, Rob, be able to get the other stuff in line and be able to put the numbers together accurately. And so I think I think planning early, I read something somewhere. It's not timing the market, it's time in the market. And it's the same thing with your business. You've got to, the earlier you plan, the easier it is to make one little tweak here and one little change there, not at 70 going, wow, I can't turn this around overnight.
Yeah. And, I say it's just math for a reason, because it is. but it's not too. I mean, we are human beings, and the emotional part of it is absolutely real. And us, guy business owners especially, maybe don't want to, come to grips with that, but it's so true. And it's very scary, to go in there and say, okay, let's lay it bare. Let's see where I'm at. That's a pretty scary and in many ways a courageous thing to do, uh, but so critical. And along with some other things, I feel like a therapist more than a financial planner these days, because you mentioned, not only are, a lot of the expenses built into the business, but a lot of your, I guess, your own self-worth, or, what you get out of life, and your joy and your purpose is within that business too. And that can absolutely, you have to be able to deal with that effectively as well, and recognize what those things are, and know that you're going to have to find, a purpose after owning your business. And you're going to have to find, ways to, use your time wisely, and, friends, and, all that kind of stuff is so tied into your business sometimes that when you leave, there's this big giant void. We see a lot of remorse, from business owners after they sell a business. And in my opinion, it doesn't have a whole heck of a lot to do with, remorse around the transaction itself. It has more to do around all these, kind of warm fuzzy things than anything else. And you want to avoid that, and you want to plan ahead for sure.
Yeah, I think so many people, when they sell their business, they spend all this time planning for the sale and selling it in retirement and all these things, and they sell it and they're kind of like, now what? Right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
They don't have an office to go to that they went to for 25 years or whatever the case may be. They don't, their phone that they didn't want to ring all the time is not ringing anymore. And now it's different, right? Nobody needs them on a daily basis.
Right.
You're absolutely right. It's planning for that is just as challenging as the financial side, and doing that early and often makes things so much easier.
Yeah, and something I like to say, I'm sure I've said this before on the podcast, is you have to really think about this opportunity that you have to live, okay, without having to necessarily make a living, which is where we're trying to get to. You can call it retirement, you can call it whatever you want, but that's where you're at. It's like, okay, well, you're getting that time back. What a huge gift that is. You take everybody in the world, and I don't know what the percentage is, but there's a very, very small, minuscule percentage. It's got to be a point something of the world population that gets that opportunity. And so if you get that opportunity, it is a gift, and you should use it wisely, and really think and be very intentional about what you use that time and that money for. And sometimes that perspective helps. So you just, you don't sit on the couch and play on Facebook or something like that. That's not a productive use of,
Right.
of the incredible gift that you have. You're a very talented, successful person that was able to build a successful business. I mean, you're a talented individual. Continue to use those talents as long as you can in some way, shape, or fashion, if that's something that you still have a desire for.
I agree completely. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So you sold your business, but the one, at least I know of one of your businesses that you sold. You sold it to your son, right?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's we could back up, I guess. That's the how we ended up here. So in my previous life, I like you, was a financial advisor.
Yeah.
I sold that practice in 2008 and started kind of in the trades. We bought a swimming pool service company, grew that, and sold that. And then I became a broker, and I've been a broker for probably 14 or 15 years, I have to look. And I listed a heating and air company for sale. And I love businesses with barriers to entry. as we've discussed, I live in Florida. I don't know a husband dumb enough in the state of Florida to tell his wife he's not fixing the air conditioner in the summertime. So I thought that's got to be a pretty good business to get into. So I bought the business, ran it for a few years, and realized I missed the brokerage world. And I went to go sell it. And my oldest son and daughter-in-law came to me and said they wanted to buy it. So they bought it probably been 7 years ago now. Um, and my office for the first 5 or 6 years was in their office still, so they got my unsolicited advice every day, which I'm sure they loved.
That's cool.
And so yeah, and that's when I made the switch. I was a broker selling everything: bars, restaurants, gas stations, flower shops, kind of you name it. I sold it, and I felt like I couldn't add value if I was selling a gas station today and a flower shop tomorrow. I felt like I couldn't add value to those people because I knew about the transaction, but I didn't know the intricate parts of the business. When I ran the heating and air company and I went to go sell it before my son decided to buy it, I was trying to get valuation and get comp data and get those things. And I found that there wasn't, on the lower end of the market, we were a smaller company. There wasn't anybody who really specialized in that. If you're doing $20 million, they'd line up to help you. But if you were doing $2 million or $1.5 million, it was challenging to find help. So when my son bought my business, I said, I'm just going to focus on selling heating and air. And I did. And I've been blessed the last 6.5 years. We've sold 140 heating and air companies. We do a little bit of plumbing and electrical as well. So it'd be trades combined. And so to say we've had an opportunity to look at a lot of deals is an understatement.
All right, I'm going to ask a loaded question. So did you get full fair market value for your business when you sold it to your kids?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
So everything I did with my kids, when I get on stage, I do a lot of preaching, a lot of speaking at industry events about selling to family members and key employees. And I use my sale as exactly the opposite of what you should do, right? And I did it all wrong. I held a note for my kids, which I absolutely preach against. I'm a big believer in using SBA financing for those transactions.
Okay.
And because, and I was a different stage in my life. At that time, I was 42 or 43 years old, probably, 40, maybe 44. And so risk wasn't that big of a deal. My office was in his office, so I still had my thumb on what was going on. I knew the employees, so I still kind of was able to manage it, watch my money a little bit. But what scares me is when I see people sell bigger companies. We're a smaller company, bigger companies to their kids or key employees and take all the risk. And now their retirement is tied into their success. So if somebody fails, now two families are devastated, not just one. And the parents' family, they're now 65 years old and retired, and their only option is to come back and resurrect the business. So it's not a great alternative. To me, I prefer to use SBA financing. That way, if you fail, which we would never want to see the kids fail, but if they do, that's between them and the bank. Christmas dinner, I always joke, Christmas dinner tastes differently when your kids aren't paying you. It can devastate families. And so over dollars and cents that could have been protected. And so I preach that. So I did a lot of things wrong in that scenario. And I talk about what I did wrong, what I do differently, and happy to share that with anybody that ever has any question.
That's cool. I'm glad I asked the question.
Yeah.
And I agree with you, that those loans among, family members, whether it's for a business or anything else, or just something that, you try to avoid. And you were a financial advisor for a while. I mean, you've seen it. You don't need that. You don't need that.
And once again, back to that time, right? If you're 40, it's one thing.
Yeah,
if you're
sure.
70,
yeah,
it's
a
another.
different time.
That changes your perspective and your outlook on things. But when there's so many easier ways to offload that risk, the other thing, and I've been self-employed since I was probably 22 years old. Being self-employed is not for everyone, right?
Right.
I have a lot of people that I'm going to give my kids the business, and the kids don't want the business, right? I mean, it's meant to be a blessing, but turns into a curse, right?
Sure.
I mean, I think you've got to be a special kind of person to want to be self-employed, and everything that comes with it. And it's not for everyone. And so you could think you're doing a good thing and it could ruin your family. when you could have done it another way.
Yeah, and my angle on that comes back from the financial planning direction. It's like, hey, number one, let's make sure you're good. And I don't know. I mean, if you have sufficient assets already, and if you sell it at a discount to your kids, and you're still good, without a note, an SBA loan or whatever, and you're in good shape, and you feel really good about that, I'm fine with it. In general, you aren't gonna get full value, I think, selling it to a management team or family owned or family member.
Typically we see a reduced value, right? They're trying to do them a favor.
Absolutely.
They also feel like oftentimes they feel like they help them build it. So they help them get what they want. And so I think you're right. But once again, Rob, it comes back to knowing what the numbers need to be, right? Knowing what your financial plan says it has to be, then knowing what the business is worth. And when the market took off and got kind of crazy the last few years on heating and air specifically, what a private equity or financial buyer was willing to pay could have been up here, and what key employees or family members could afford to pay is down here, right? Because somebody's going to pay this doesn't mean the bank's going to appraise it at that value. So then the question becomes, do I take a drastic pay cut and sell it to my kids because the bank won't even lend them what these people are willing to buy? Or is there another way I can take care of my family, sell it to these financial buyers or whoever they may be, and then find something else to do to take care of my family and help them out?
Absolutely. No,
so there's all sorts of alternatives if you plan ahead.
Yeah. No, I agree. Well, everybody, Patrick Lange, man, you've really thrown some wisdom at us today. Really appreciate you being on. A couple of things that I need from you, Patrick. One is, how do we get to that valuation on your website? And the second thing is, let us know the best way to contact you if somebody wants to talk to you and discuss some of these items further. And we'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the front page of my website, so businessmodificationgroup.com I think it's in a red, right in the center of the page is get a valuation here. Right on there is my phone number as well, so they can reach out. I'm happy to talk to people. I'm also extremely active on LinkedIn and Facebook. I've got a YouTube channel. It's just Patrick Lange. You'll see me standing at my farm just talking about heating and air or selling businesses. So certainly there's a resource there. But if anybody has any questions, one, I appreciate you taking the time to watch it. And Rob, thank you so much for letting me come on today. I had a fantastic time.
Of course.
Don't hesitate to reach out. Anything I can do to answer questions, I'm more than happy to do whatever I can do to help out.
Man, that's fantastic. So you and I, if we're not connected already on LinkedIn, I think we will be. So you'll be able to get to Patrick through there. YouTube videos, definitely we'll put a link in for that, as well as to your website. And then just kind of say what your phone number is so we have it recorded, and then that'll be in the show notes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. 850-669-2498. 850-669-2498.
Great, Patrick. Again, appreciate you being on board today. This has been a fantastic discussion. Really thoroughly enjoyed it. All you folks out there, just remember this is the kind of content we're looking for. If you have a story yourself about your own business or know of one, let me know about it so we can share. This whole project is about exactly that, trying to bring some great information together so that we can just all get better. Thanks for being here today. Hope everybody has a great week. Take care.
Thank you so much.